Well, hello, fellow students. This is an interview that I am conducting with Anne Beneventi as part of my community college studies. And as part of our study for the last semester, we learned about different methods of assessing children that are used in most educational settings. And most commonly, school-age children are evaluated by using quantitative methods, which means that we're collecting data and then we are evaluating those data, which mainly are numbers, so we can compare them. However, using quantitative methods like that, such as an IQ test or Common Core testing, is often not very useful when assessing younger children, particularly of a preschool age or kindergarten age, because they can't really read yet, and then many of them don't have the attention span to sit through full IQ testing, such as the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for young children. So often what is used then at this point, and this is where Anne is a specialist in, is a qualitative assessment methods. And so Anne, just wanted to give a little bit of background on her. She is a giftedness consultant and director of qualitative assessment. Anne has focused on the needs of gifted children throughout her career, and she has worked with Marie Roper for over a decade. She is Anne Marie's successor and the director of the Gifted Qualitative Assessment, which is also known as GQA. She currently has a private practice in the Bay Area, she's evaluating children for giftedness using the qualitative assessment and consulting with families and schools to provide appropriate educational and emotional support for gifted children. She's an associate of the Gifted Development Center in Colorado, which, for those who are knowledgeable about gifted assessment, is the mecca for gifted children, so to speak. Additionally, she serves as the chair of the Global Awareness Network of the National Association for Gifted Children and is board of the Gifted Homeschool Forum. Anne taught at Nueva School for the Gifted and co-founded not just one, but 4 schools for the gifted: the Kalmea International School in Alexandria, Egypt, very exotic, the Rupa West in Berkeley, California, the Helios School in Sunnyvale, also California, and she's currently working with Relation School, which I do think is also a local venue, where she continues to evaluate applicants for admissions to those schools by using the Gifted Qualitative Assessment method. I personally met Anne almost 15 years ago. It was shortly after I had contacted her to assess my then 6-year-old son, Max, who was interestingly showing some very perplexing development in school, and we were running in quite a bit of difficulties at that time. So Anne helped us out, and I do want to thank Anne for being here today and letting me ask her a bunch of questions on the topic of gifted qualitative assessment. So Anne, let me start off.
Thank you.
Let me start off.
I just wonder if I could make a quick correction to my bio. Thank you for that kind introduction. I am past chair of the Global Awareness Network and the Gifted Homeschoolers Board. Thank you.
It does sound like a lot otherwise. It would keep you pretty busy. So let me start off with asking you a question. So in general, just for people out there, what would be a definition of qualitative assessment?
Well, generally, qualitative assessment is, as opposed to quantitative assessment, that gives you a numerical score. Qualitative assessment does not. It's things that cannot be put into a number, basically. And so qualitative assessment is often used in situations where there's more subtleties. We can't reduce something to a number. So, in other words, a quantitative assessment, which would be an IQ test or an achievement test, they're showing you how much, how many. Qualitative assessment is answering the questions how and why more so.
Mm. So yours specifically specialize in identifying gifted learners.
That's correct.
So for most people, that means that, just take an IQ test and you get a number and that's all we need, no? Or do we need more?
Well, I think ideally, when we're understanding a child, we would like to have more. Now, IQ tests give us a certain amount of information, but qualitative assessment gives us a different kind of information. Also, it has to do with understanding an IQ test and interpreting an IQ test, understanding the subtests and how they average out to give you a full scale IQ. It has to do with testers being trained and using their own professional judgment in administering an IQ test. But with qualitative assessment, we really want to get to characteristics and an understanding of the child that's outside of the norm of an IQ test and the kinds of information. It has to do with the quality of information that you get.
Okay. So that kind of goes in sync with my next question, because I think that society at large still thinks that being gifted automatically goes in step with being academically successful. And others would argue, and that has also been my experience, that gifted children should be truly identified and treated as children with special needs. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think just by virtue of being outside of the statistical norm, makes gifted children a special needs group. But it's one of the myths that gifted children are high achievers. Sometimes they are. When we talk about giftedness and gifted children, there's so many nuances. So we don't want to talk in extremes, and we don't want to talk in generalities. So I'm usually saying things like often or sometimes, but what we see is gifted children are not always successful in school, and we see a lot of underachievement in school because there's a mismatch between the learning environment that's designed for those kids that are more average and the needs, the specific needs and the unique needs of this population. And so one of the things is gifted children can be disinterested in school. They master the skills very quickly, and a lot comes out of being bored. They can be underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed. They can be seen as behavior problems because they're not properly challenged and they're misunderstood. There's very little training for teachers on the needs of gifted children.
Yeah, I can totally concur with you on that. The boredom is a big issue. So that was more so for school age children. Do you, in your experience, can one observe already significant differences in between, let's say, neurotypical preschoolers and gifted children of that same age? Is that already possible at that young age? We're talking about like 3, 4, 5.
Yes, absolutely. We can see giftedness from birth. Giftedness is innate, and we're observing a difference in children, even infants. there's a different type of alertness. They often have early eye contact, and the differences continue. In these young children, we're seeing that they often have early verbal ability.
Mm.
Um, the types of questions are showing more depth. Even children as early as 1 year to 18 months, we're seeing a longer attention span, um, an early interest in books.
Yeah.
It's just the quality of their attention, but also a different type of sensitivity that they often exhibit because they're understanding things that are beyond their capacity to really process emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's where you have the asynchronicity, like asynchronous behavior in between the age and the actual mind, so to speak.
Right, right. One characteristic of gifted children is they do have asynchronous or uneven development.
Mm-hmm.
So they're out of sync both internally. They can have strengths, but also certain aspects of their development can lag. For instance, they can have very high verbal ability, but maybe their physical or motor development can lag, something like that. But they're also out of sync with children their chronological age.
Yeah.
And so they they need, in order to develop their social their social development optimally, they need to connect with children who share their intellectual ability and their
Very
verbal.
important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go back again a little bit to Anne Marie Roper, which has been, I know, a very important figure in your life. And she is definitely revered as a pioneer in gifted education. For those of us that are not familiar with her work, could you give us a little bit of a, personal insight into her and what her work meant for so many gifted children out there?
Well, Anna Marie Roper, with her husband George, founded the Roper School in 1941. And they had one of the first gifted schools in the country. And children got admitted with an IQ test. But Anna Marie would spend time with these children and was able to predict their IQ based on their emotional characteristics. Now, Anna Marie saw behaviors through the emotions. So even if a child had a strong intellectual drive, Anna Marie saw it as an emotional need for intellectual stimulation.
Mhm.
And so, because she was so keyed into the characteristics of gifted, she began to understand how are moderately gifted children different from highly or profoundly gifted children.
Mhm.
And that's how she was able to predict IQ. So I mentored with Anna Marie for over a decade, and she based her qualitative assessment on understanding children through these characteristics. Um, and one of the most valuable things I learned from Anna Marie was how to pull back my agenda when I'm evaluating a child so
Ah,
the child's inner agenda could emerge. She
mhm.
felt it was very important to support who the child really is,
Mhm.
because children will be the healthiest if they're connected to who they really are and are able to be supported in that. So that's what we looked for. First of all, who is that child? And then, are they gifted? How gifted? And how do we know?
Mhm. Well, so that gave us a pretty good idea on how just gifted qualitative assessment is different a little bit from regular maybe qualitative assessment of a 4-year-old in a preschool program. So when you do an assessment, could you walk us through what that looks like? You come visit, you see a kid, you.
Yes. Well, I went beyond Anna Marie's assessment because I was seeing so many children with processing issues
Mm,
and different learning disabilities or issues that we could offer them early intervention. But what was
mm,
happening is these discrepancies between their abilities and their, say, school achievement or how they were performing, there was a discrepancy that could hold children back, and I wanted to understand this. So I went to Linda Silverman and studied with her at the Gifted Development Center, um, and learned more about this aspect. I have a lot of respect for Anna Marie because she insisted in looking at children in their wholeness and looking at them through the lens of giftedness. But I felt like I needed to go the next level and understand the processing. And so when I do an assessment, I use the forms from the Gifted Development Center,
mhm,
and I'm relying on information from parents.
mhm,
Parents are the best identifiers of gifted because they're understanding the early milestones. They're seeing their child in comparison of to other children that age, and so we're relying on information from parents. So I ask parents to fill out a series of forms. We're
mhm,
looking at a developmental questionnaire because I want to see the developmental milestones. And then we're looking at personality. I want to understand, is this child introverted? Are they extroverted? It helps me even understand how to connect with this child.
mhm,
Um, I'm looking at sensory processing issues. Many children, we're seeing sensory processing issues in early childhood, and that's where we want to remediate it. We want to be able to support those little glitches that can happen that can hold children back from reaching their potential.
mhm,
um, we're looking at patterns of ADHD, and we're looking at intensities. We know that gifted children have more intensity and more sensitivity. And the intensities, this is the work of Dabrowski, who was studying actually moral development, but
mhm,
a byproduct of his work was understanding intensities in gifted and creative people. And what he said is that there's 5 areas that gifted children have more response. So there's intellectual drive, um, there's stronger emotional responses,
mhm,
including empathy. There's more imaginational ability. There's more sensual, which on these forms relate more to art and music and nature,
mhm.
and there's more psychomotor, just energy in their bodies. And so I
Oh,
have
yeah.
parents fill out a questionnaire to understand, because it also helps us know how to support this child.
Mhm,
And then finally, the characteristics of gifted. We use the top 25 characteristics from the Gifted Development Center, and I'm asking parents to give me examples because the quality of those characteristics can
mhm,
tell you a lot. So, say a characteristic like empathy, maybe a parent in their example will say something like, he's kind to his younger brother. And maybe they'll write something like, um, my child saw children in Africa that didn't have shoes and started a shoe drive to collect shoes for children in Africa. There's a qualitative difference that usually correlates to levels of giftedness.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I have parents fill out these forms in
mhm,
advance. I look at the forms, I score them. Now, even though I'm scoring them, this is qualitative information from the
mhm,
parents because it's subjective.
mhm,
So I'm scoring the forms before I even meet the child. I have a rough idea of a profile, but then I meet with the child. I prefer to meet in children's homes if
Yeah.
possible, because I
Mhm.
want to get the most authentic look. And this is where children are most comfortable.
True.
So I go to their home. I have no agenda, and I really don't. Whatever they do is fine. I want to look at what do they do when no one's imposing something on them?
Mhm.
What are they choosing? These are all clues. What are they thinking about? What are they talking about? So I just interact with the child without imposing my agenda. Basically, whatever they do is fine and is able to be interpreted. Um, so I meet with the child for around an hour,
Mhm.
and sometimes what the parents write is confirmed. Sometimes I have a different take, and sometimes I'm seeing the same things, but because of my knowledge of gifted children, I'm interpreting it differently from the parents. And so then I meet with the parent or parents and I talk about my observations and recommendations. I
Mhm.
talk about how do we support this child? And of course, if I see that any early intervention, besides understanding that they're gifted, would help this child,
Mhm.
just resources.
Mhm.
And then I send, a report, a little summary of my findings and a summary of the scores from their parent forms.
Well, it sounds like it takes a special kind of person to be able to do that, and it sort of like brings me back to a quote from Anne Marie Roper, who said that the only instrument complex enough to understand a human being is another human being. So this is not something that is easily learned from one day to the next. So and then on top of that, you're dealing with a rather complex population of children. So what are the requirements that a gifted qualitative assessor needs to have, or the personality or the communication skills that you need to bring with you? And do you actually have to be gifted?
Well, it certainly helps. Right now, we are designing the training program for gifted
Yeah.
practitioners of gifted qualitative assessment. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're looking very carefully at what are the qualifications. It's really important that the person has a background in gifted. Of course, it's helpful if they're a gifted person because they can empathize with the child and they can understand it from a personal level. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but but I think the most important trait is this ability to pull back your own agenda
Okay.
and let the child's unfold. This
Mm-hmm.
this was the hardest thing for me to learn
Really? Yeah.
because I was a teacher of gifted kids. I loved to interact with them, and I knew that I could stimulate them and have fun with them. But this really requires the ability to pull back your agenda so that the child feels safe. I've been with children before when they're saying, "What do you want me to do?" They've never been with an adult whoever you are, whatever you do is fine. I just want to get to know you. And
Uh-huh.
this is this takes us really a special trait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely sounds difficult. Do you ask any kind of leading questions, or while you're interacting with the child, or while the child interacts with you more so?
Yeah, sometimes I do ask the child questions. It's not that I'm a just completely blank.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
want to interact, but I don't want to stop the child's process, or I don't
Okay.
want them, especially gifted children. They learn to please very young, and this is one of the risks that they learn in preschool. I can't believe how young children are when they begin to intuit that they're different and that they want to fit in and they want to please.
Mhm.
Um, I evaluated a child. Her mother showed me these incredible drawings that she did, both of figures and also of scenes with buildings. I mean,
Mhm.
the art
Mhm.
was exquisite. Really, um, really an example of an advanced potential in a child.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
You can see a lot through art in terms of development and developmental potential. And then the mother showed me scribbling. And the child said to her mom, "This is how we color at preschool." And this is a particular problem with girls. They acquiesce, they turn
Mhm.
into chameleons, and they act like everybody else. And their giftedness goes underground. And this is really a crisis. So I want to see children in their authenticity. I want to see who they are. You can get so much information when you're not imposing restrictions on a
Mhm.
child.
Mhm. That sounds, yeah, that must be heartbreaking to see once in a while when you get those children and at that young age already. Unbelievable.
It's not only heartbreaking, for me or the child or the family. I think it's a bit of a national crisis
Mm.
because, here we have these gifted children that are so full of curiosity and
Yeah.
so driven to learn just based on their internal motivation.
Mhm.
It really can get shut down by schools. And it's just,
Yeah. So it this, which means also that teachers play an important role here in recognizing and gifted children in particular. And I know you said there isn't much formal training that teachers get, and I know particularly probably not in for preschool teachers. But what are some things, if you had to just name three of them, that might help a preschool teacher identify a gifted child?
um, well, for understanding how to identify, um, we want to look at, is this child curious?
Mhm.
Are they um, do they have a high need for understanding? Are they highly verbal? Now, if they're not highly verbal, it doesn't mean that they're gifted. In more introverted children that age, sometimes they don't speak unless they have it completely formulated. And these are children that we see as two-year olds who aren't speaking and then speak full sentences and then move to paragraphs very quickly.
That
Um,
sounds like Einstein, right? He was supposed to be a little bit like that, where he didn't speak until he could make complete sentences.
yeah,
Yeah.
these are the children who are asking why, and they're actually
Mm.
listening to the answers. And a common scenario is that these children can be annoying. They're not fitting into the norm. By the time they turn, 3 or 4, grandparents are complaining that they're spoiled, because they need to know why before complying. Um,
Okay. Mhm.
and they can because they're working at a higher level than their age mates. They can be manipulative.
Ah.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes they get very obsessive about doing something themselves or
Oh.
completing a task. Often preschools are set up so that children need to rotate in a task every 15 minutes or something.
Mhm. Mhm.
But in terms of identification, I would look at curiosity. That is a
Yeah.
hallmark of high intelligence. They're gaining the skills at a faster rate. They
Yeah.
often come into preschool already reading.
Mhm.
Now, of course, sometimes they hide it.
Mhm.
But yeah,
I found it's like many of them are obsessed with one particular thing. Like they know everything about cars or
right,
about dinosaurs or I get some very airplanes. They seem to be the at times collectors, that appear to be like 65 years old and show you their entire collection of whatever their obsession is.
right. They are serial learners and they'll
Hmm.
go into a lot of depth on a topic. And of course, their excellent memory helps them remember all of the facts about it. And then they'll move on to the next thing. So yeah, that's really true. They have an
Yeah,
incredible attention span
yeah,
often
very
for
true.
a preferred
Yeah,
activity.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Can I
as,
say one more? Can I say one more thing that we're
yeah,
seeing
sure,
early
absolutely.
with
Yeah,
the children? They're often interested in mature subjects,
yeah,
but they can
true.
also get frightened because of their reasoning ability. They have a lot of information about something,
Yes.
and then they don't know how to emotionally handle the information. So it can be frightening. For instance, I'm seeing a lot of preschoolers that have an interest in natural disasters, and
Yeah.
they're intrigued by the power of it,
Yes.
but then they understand the ramifications and they feel powerless. And so it can also be very, very frightening.
Yeah, my daughter, when she was 4, she refused to travel to Hawaii because there were volcanoes there,
Yeah.
which her older 3-year-old brother was obsessed with at the time.
Right, right.
So she knew what volcanoes meant, and he was obsessed with it. So, which brings me to, as the parent of 2 gifted children, I personally was often told over and over again that the solution to instructing gifted children in the public school was going to be Common Core and its curriculum, which apparently was supposed to allow for more differentiation and individual leveling for gifted learners. I mean, I personally have found that not to be the truth. Do you, in your own personal experience, have you found that Common Core has kind of lived up to that promise?
Well, I rarely see true differentiation in schools.
Yeah.
And this is a real problem because gifted children have the capacity to go at a much faster pace. They also need more depth and complexity and just learning the skills. And then, of course, we have No Child Left Behind, which is a mandate to bring everybody up to average. And once they're on grade level, then there's no programs to support them beyond that.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, beyond just learning the skills, we really need to teach to this innate abstract reasoning ability, which is a real another hallmark of giftedness. They have the capacity to make connections between subjects
Mhm.
and then come up with their own information, kind of the higher thinking
Mhm.
skills from Bloom's. Um, they can process skills um, that involve complex thinking that's
Yeah.
abstract, and to just look at their skills is really not enough. And Common Core is looking at skills, but I think it's crucial that we teach children to take the skills that they've learned and kind of synthesize them and put them toward real life situations.
Mhm. Mhm. So, well, we are about to change administrations here in the United States. So if you had a magic wand that you could just twirl around, what would be some of the changes that you would like to see in the US in general regarding gifted education? Um, and I'm also asking you also what particularly could we do better here in California? Because I do think that there are definitely some issues around gifted education in California.
Well, first of all, we have very few programs for gifted in California. And it comes down to funding, but it also comes down to another misconception where people think that gifted children have it made. They'll be fine on their own, which isn't true. So if there are programs for the gifted, children are usually tested into them in third grade.
Mhm.
And I think it's really crucial to start looking at giftedness early.
Earlier. Mhm.
Yeah, especially in preschool.
Mhm.
Because that's when children are developing their identity and they're already understanding that they're different. Um, and they're, so one thing I would do is have programs for the gifted because it's crucial, as I said, for social development,
Mhm.
for gifted children to be with intellectual peers.
Yes.
Children start very early to lose interest in children who can't do what they do or who can't speak at their level. And so their own social development is stilted.
Mhm.
And so another misconception is that programs for the gifted are elitist, but really the opposite is true. When children are in programs that are always too easy or they're always the top of the class, that's when they can start to feel like they're the best.
Yeah.
But when they get into gifted programs and they see that there's kids who are more advanced than them, it's a humbling situation and phenomenon that happens with them. So definitely gifted programs. Um, I I'm really behind this idea of ability grouping, especially in math. I'm seeing so many children with early math talent that are in public school and need to stay on grade level. And what
Mhm.
happens is we lose this talent.
Yeah.
Children start to underachieve
Mhm.
because everything's too easy, they get sloppy. And when children are not performing in math but we know they have the ability,
Yeah.
I'll ask parents to advocate for more challenge in math because they'll be more focused if they're challenged. We've seen this.
Yeah. And more challenge doesn't mean more work,
No,
which
not
has often been the case for my children. They just like had to, well, you can have something more challenging if you finish the regular things that I want children to do today or students to do today. And then they got an extra worksheet on top of that. And
yeah.
that
This
did
is
not
like
work well for them.
like a punishment. They need appropriate work
Mhm.
um, instead of the general classwork. They
Instead of
need
the
something that's
challenge.
challenging. They deserve something. Everybody needs an appropriate curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So very true. Well, let's hope that things will change for the better in the near future. And thank you so much for being with us today, with me today. And hopefully this recording will help some of my future compatriot preschool teachers in identifying some gifted children that we then can send your way for evaluation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claudia. And, you know, if I were to say one thing for teachers who are preschool teachers, gifted children need the same things emotionally as average children in terms of a sense of belonging and feeling like they can be themselves at school and don't have to change who they are. but also think about, if you're doing a project where you're planting something, um, teach them about photosynthesis or some of the vocabulary that's higher level. Or if you're teaching them about the human body, they'll want to know about, why do we wash our hands, and they'll want to learn about germs. And if you can bring in more depth for these children, they want to learn about something in a lot of depth. And if they're given an appropriate conceptual curriculum, then they will be emotionally with more well-being.
And they often also take off as individualized learners too. So once you set the right groundwork, you might be surprised at where they can go by themselves.
Well, they do have an innate
Yeah.
desire to learn. They are self-motivated. And we don't want to shut down
That, right? Yeah. We want to develop that early so that they can take it into the elementary school years and then later on wherever else they go. Well, Anne, it's been a pleasure. And good luck with all your endeavors in the future. And I hope our paths will cross soon again.
Thank you so very much, and good luck to all the teachers and future teachers.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.